should be extremely interesting. And then we have a couple of our favorite docents from this museum who are going to do a special presentation on the America's Civil War, the navies of the North and South. So we have tremendous schedule coming up. Now tonight, we're doing something a little bit different. We haven't done this before. Instead of having one speaker, we actually have 4 writers, and each one is going to read from some of his writing, just a short piece, and then afterwards, we're going to have kind of a forum, and you can ask them any questions regarding the writing, their travels, and I think you all got a handout when you came in, so I'm not going to do introductions. You have a short bio on each of these people, and you can kind of identify them, and then you'll know, what questions you want to ask. So without further ado, we're going to start with our first speaker, Ken.
Thanks, Lorraine. Thank you, everybody, for coming. It's pretty rare when your last name starts with M that you get to go first, but I got to handpick these writers, and I didn't pick them on their ability, I picked them on their last names. So I win. Actually, on a serious note, I want to thank Arlene because she's just been a real champion of words, and I so appreciate her support. Some of you have had to listen to me before, so the good news is that this is short. But I sincerely appreciate the support of this museum and your group, not just for me, but for books in general. Because it's a tough time for books in some instances, and it's just nice to know that people still care about words, because I think words are important, and I'm a little bit biased, but I believe they can make a difference. So anyhow, the beauty of this is it is short, and I just started wearing glasses, and I want to warn you ahead of time that the first thing I did after I got them was sit on them. So they're kind of crooked, but you're all seafaring people, so maybe it's like I'm listening, so hold on a second. And I'm also going to get in trouble for this, but I want to thank my beautiful wife, Kathy, for all her support. She's, I won't single her out because they'll have to walk home. But, so I'm going to read 2 very short things from a book called Off Season, Discovering America on Winter Shore. I know the theme here is water, and all of us here are big fans of water. So that was an easy theme. If it had been desert, I would have had to ask Ed Abbey to come. But these are things that are close to our hearts. And this is from Off Season. One little bit is funny, and then the next little bit is sad, because both of those make us reflect on this gift called life. So here's the funny part. I like funny. Both of these take place on Ocracoke Island in North Carolina. Anybody been there? Oh, cool. Yeah, great place. How fun. Rarely do I see hands go up. Not that it's out of the way place, but it's across the country for starters. And it's an absolutely gorgeous place, so for those of you who hadn't been there, I highly recommend it. I visited there in November, so it's that was sort of the point of off-season, was to visit these coastal communities when they returned to themselves and the tourists were gone. And I think the thing that's so fun about water people, and you are water people, and you know a lot of water people, but they seem to have like a lot of common sense, water folk. I don't know why that is, but it just is. So this first brief bit is an indication of that common sense. On the small island of Ocracoke, North Carolina, there once lived a man named Cleveland Gaskins, Clee to his friends. Clee once took an interest in some toilet paper he saw advertised in a Sears Roebuck catalog. This was some time ago, before the point-and-click age. Having decided to purchase this toilet paper, Clee had his daughter pen a brief letter. Dear Sears Roebuck, I would like to buy a dozen rolls of toilet paper. Please send the toilet paper to my home on Ocracoke. Sincerely, Cleveland Gaskins. Cleve put the note and the money in an envelope, and off it went on the mailboat. Time passed, and no toilet paper came. But a letter from Sears Roebuck did arrive. Dear Mr. Gaskins, we don't sell toilet paper by the dozen. Please consult our catalog for the quantities we offer. Clee instructed his daughter to craft the response. Dear Sears Roebuck, I recently ordered a dozen rolls of toilet paper. Instead, I got a letter telling me to order directly from the catalog. Gentlemen, I can assure you, if I had one of your catalogs, I wouldn't need your damn toilet paper. Is that great or what? And you run into these people all the time if you spend your time around the water. I don't know what it is. I mean, I have a million stories, and I'm sure my fellow writers do too, and you do too. And it's just, as a writer, you run into these people and you think, this is too good to be true. And this story is a little bit sadder, but I think we can learn things from both happiness and sadness. Also on Ocracoke Island, I eased my kayak into Silver Lake Harbor one blustery November afternoon. The blue sky hung with fast-moving gray clouds running with the chill northerly wind. It takes only a few minutes to paddle the length of Ocracoke's tiny harbor to where it opens up to Pamlico Sound. Paddling toward the harbor mouth, I could see an uncountable army of whitecaps frothing in the distance until they disappeared from sight. Another kayaker bobbed at the harbor mouth. I saw him before he saw me. His head was down. I could see the waterproof chart, likely a nautical chart, spread across the deck of his red kayak. He had a compass, too, and was nattily covered in various waterproof gear. I suddenly felt naked and embarrassed. It was true, I had thought to wear a wetsuit, but I still felt like a child leaving home with matches and a bag of licorice in his backpack. I have never been much for equipment or planning. Ours is a wondrous age of technological doodads. Thumbnail-sized camping stoves and global positioning systems that pinpoint the animal droppings you're standing on. But I lose equipment, and I usually don't know how to work the equipment I manage to hang on to. I realize it is unwise to head into a wild place without even a compass, but I would surely get lost wandering around trying to find where I put it. As for planning, it smothers spontaneity, or to be honest, it requires too much work. My fellow kayaker was bristling with equipage, and judging from the focused look on his face, he knew how to use it. I considered paddling quietly past. Perhaps he wouldn't look up, but this seemed both cowardly and alarmingly antisocial. Plus, you never know what you'll learn if you speak to people. Beautiful out here, isn't it? I said. His head came up slowly, as if reluctant to leave the chart. He appeared to be in his 50s, though it was hard to tell, as only a small portion of his face emerged from the bubble wrap of protective gear. It sure is beautiful, he said, absorbing my bare skin and minimalist equipage with a practiced glance. Being short, roughly 8 feet, my kayak is maneuverable, but it is also easily buffeted by wind. In the exposed harbor mouth, the wind had assumed a new velocity. I had to dig my paddle into the water to keep my bow from swinging around and the winds from shoving me unceremoniously sideways back into the harbor. My companion's kayak was a traditional model made for long ocean-going paddles, nearly 20 feet and annoyingly stable. His paddle rested beside the chart, and his bow remained precisely pointed into the wind. "Where are you heading?" he asked. It was a polite inquiry, though I thought I detected a trace of professional concern. Few things rankle me, but one of them is people who assume a superiority of competence, even if it does exist. "I don't know," I said. This was largely true. I knew I was turning left once I exited the harbor, though now this didn't seem like much of a navigational plan. I certainly wasn't going to tell him I was thinking about paddling to Teach's Hole. If it was a nautical chart spread on his deck, he would quickly calculate the distance in my idiocy. We floated in the water, the wind beating between us, and exchanged pleasantries. His name was David. He was from Cary, North Carolina. He'd come to Ocracoke for the long Thanksgiving weekend. He didn't smile as we talked, but his tone was amiable. I had drifted close enough to see that he had a small plastic orb affixed to the shoulder of his jacket. Technologically speaking, it resembled one of those Christmas snow globes, only instead of swirling snowflakes, it contained a winking light. His eyes followed mine. "I'm one of those people who like to plan," he said. The statement was unapologetic, and his face remained expressionless, but it seemed to me a humorous nod to his own personal quirk. I appreciated his honesty. David asked where I was from, and when I told him California, he said his wife's family lived in California. "My wife died about a year and a half ago," he said, "of cancer." The water slapped at the sides of my kayak, and the wind blew in front of a horizon without color. It is impossible to find the right words for sorrow like this, so I said what I felt, and the words sounded pointless and trite. "I'm so sorry." Then I realized David was finishing his voyage, not beginning it. "I was just paddling in a sluice back there," he said, almost absently. "There were herons and egrets. It probably goes back 2 miles. You know, I was paddling back there, and I'm thinking, this is one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen." I paddled to David's sluice. Sheltered from the wind, the sluice, little wider than my paddle in most places, meandered toward the interior of the island, through straw-covered marsh grass and a few scattered guano-stained trees. The water was less than a foot deep in some places. The tide was running out, and beneath the water's marble-clear and smooth surface, I could see tiny bird tracks in the mud bottom, fine, graceful etchings that sang of flight. Out of the wind it was warm. Birds sang, and egrets, snow-white and silent, swooped low, dropping below the brown grass to their own secrets. The bow of my kayak created ripples that made the reluctant way to the mud bank, where they were absorbed forever. When I finally turned around, I stopped paddling and closed my eyes, and the tide's delicate tug drew me slowly back to the sound. It was lovely, but it was hung with sadness too, this beautiful place given to me by a man who couldn't plan for everything.
Harder to see. Thompson, right.
Thanks everyone for allowing us to be here. I'm Roger Thompson. Wrote a book called My Best Friend's Funeral, which I'm not reading from. I'm actually reading from a chapter from a new book that's due in about 6 hours. And so this is the last chance. If this chapter bombs, I'm going to take it away from the book, so you guys have a big responsibility to let me know. I'm pretty certain that this goes against all sorts of my contracts, so if anyone speaks to my publisher, don't let them know that I've been reading this. This chapter is a little bit retrospective. I was told 5 to 10 minutes, and like any good writer, I asked for 12. And so this is a little bit longer, a little retrospective. It's from the new book I'm writing is a book of travel essays. I write about deserts, oceans, and mountains, and how they've shaped different parts of my life. And so this particular one's actually from my hometown, Ventura. So I wanted to write a chapter in this next book about Ventura. So, like I said, it's a little retrospective on that. It's called Hometown Ghosts. The squid boats arrived in the dark. Metal holes sat high above docks, where men cleaned and scrubbed and fought against effects of the sea. Through the night, they lowered frameworks of stadium lights over water, attracting squid to the surface to be caught by massive nets. Men set out from ships and skiffs to surround the shoal of squid. They checked the floats and the knots. The knots must hold. Squid is measured by the ton. Ships worked the channel, the water between the mainland and the string of islands that make up Channel Islands National Park, one of the least visited in the country. These small land masses are referred to as the Galapagos Islands of the Northern Hemisphere. They stand mostly untouched, a reminder of the Eden this land once was. In the shadows of these islands, boats made their catch and set their compass home. I woke before the sun to surf. Water is darkest pre-dawn in the placid hours before the shifting of winds. The only sound were waves and foghorns and distant rumblings of the night train. While the city slumbered, the harbor was alive with motion and smells of squid. Vacuum sucked the large-eyed creatures from the bellies of hulking vessels and dumped them from steel-clanking conveyor belts into wheeled tubs of ice. The squid were loaded aboard waiting semi-trucks and transported nearby plants to be frozen and packaged and shipped to China, In local restaurants, the mantles and tentacles would be cut and fried and served as fresh calamari. The men worked in silence, fueled only by black coffee and stainless steel thermoses and thoughts of sunrise. Ventura and I are in the middle of a long and complicated relationship. I was born here and we've always known each other. I know its quirks. The early summer sun is slow to burn through the fog, and no matter how much I wish for snow, Christmas is often the warmest day of the year. And Ventura knows me, that my sister and I would play in the ocean until Grandma forced us to leave in a vintage VW bug filled with sand. Even now, with a whiff of VW upholstery, I'm a kid jumping foam balls and incoming waves along the pier. As I've aged, the relationship changed. The land has given, as it has taken. It's given romantic spots for a first love and a first kiss, secret surf breaks to explore with buddies, and a niche in the harbor to begin my first business with my best friend Tim. It was a surf clothing company called South Jetty, named after a surf spot formed from the last jetty in town before new currents forced them to build another jetty further south. It's where I confided in him about girls and the death of my dad. I was baptized there, as were my kids. And when Tim died, the boat passed the jetty before spreading his ashes to sea. I returned often to visit the ghosts. I surfed the jetty at dawn, passing the harbor where fishermen unloaded their catch. The work is long and hard. The rewards are sunrises along the wild edges of earth, and cash earned from its dwindling abundance. Tired and hungry, they'll spend this money at local cafes where orders are taken by single mothers and served by surfers saving tips for the next big trip, and cooked by immigrants sending money to extended family in Mexico. Ventura is a working class town. It's devoid of universities and large corporations and the cultural strata those institutions create. Everybody here is on an equal level. It's a culture of common respect for our work, for our resources, for each other. Ventura is a place where doctors surf with high school dropouts. There are no box seats to the opera. For this reason, from the outside, Ventura has been perceived as lower class than its fancy neighbor Santa Barbara to the north, receiving names like Arkansas by the Sea or Kentucky. Some of this label is derived from the overabundance of thrift stores, parlors, and sketchy tattoo businesses. Ventura has also been called a haven for hippies and the homeless. Because of this diverse population, the public restrooms don't always smell like homeless shower. They sometimes smell like weed. Not all observations are true. For those of us fortunate enough to grow up here, Ventura is more like the deep tracks of a favorite album. Not the flashy singles meant for popular consumption, but the artful melody embodying the heart of an artist. These are the songs that move a soul. Ventura is geographically bound. It sits between mountains and ocean, further outlined by two rivers that no longer flow to the sea. City limits are hemmed by fields rich with fertile topsoil, some of the best in the country, growing strawberries and avocados, celery, and lemons. These fields keep the city honest. Any growth requires a trade-off of produce for concrete. The city is nestled banana-like along coastal foothills barren of trees, with the exception of a single hill with two eucalyptuses sitting atop like old friends. On the furthest hill to the west, only a stone's throw from the ocean, sits a wooden cross. It is erected by the Padres, founders of the California missions. Since the founding of Ventura's mission, the cross has served as a guidepost for travelers, alerting them of the mission's location. It's also a great spot to make out. This land has been occupied for thousands of years. Before the missions and the Spaniards were the Chumash Indians. They were known as bread makers, or seashell people. They're one of the few sedentary tribes in North America, not needing to move with seasons or follow game for food. The Chumash were water people, looking to the ocean. They created seafaring canoes, allowing them to travel easily between communities on the islands and fish for deep water game. The easy access to ocean and fresh water and year-round mild temperature made this one of the most resource-abundant places on Earth. The Chumash were a mellow, happy tribe as a result of it. The mellow vibe is still felt today. We are still water people. The shoreline of Ventura curves with the northernmost and southernmost beaches extending like tips of a crescent moon. Between live the stories of our people. Mine began with troubles. I went to the water's edge and gave them to the maker of the ocean, where they were tumbled with the tides and given back as something beautiful, like a piece of sea glass from a once discarded bottle. The town is nuanced. Yes, it has too many thrift stores and the rest. It also has great taco shops and artists and coffee roasters who go through the trouble of sourcing coffee directly from farms of coffee-growing regions, because it tastes better and it's the right thing to do. In these ways, Ventura is perhaps more like a Midwestern town, or one from Arkansas. Individually, Together, we gather at the crescent edge of the sea to walk along the wooden pier or wet sand between the jetties. We look to the ocean expectantly. There must be something in the water. The beach is coldest when the clouds stay heavy on the hillsides. When they clear after a cold rain, snow can be seen on the mountains beyond. The cold wind curves over 8,000-foot peaks of the Los Padres National Forest and funnels through a descending series of valleys before reaching the water. In its descent, wind picks up speed, carrying a cold, penetrating even the toughest Patagonia jackets designed their headquarters just up the beach. Suiting up to surf in the early spring felt like an expedition to the Arctic. 4mm wetsuit, thick booties, a hood. The water bit through it all. From the water, I looked back on my hometown. Light was full, and I could still see the ghosts. I hold them like shadows I can't let go of. Tim, Dad, the land where I buried broken pieces of my heart. I've run from here, thinking I could escape the past. I built a new life in other towns, thinking Ventura was holding me back. I've cursed Ventura, the long stretches between swells, the fog that prequels summer. I've been embarrassed by Ventura, the parking structure on the beach, the lack of architectural imagination through our main corridors. Some days the town looks like I woke up and decided to go through the day in sweatpants and slippers. In my running, I've traveled the great cities of our country and other countries. Inevitably, with the benefit of distance, I would think of Ventura and my hometown ghosts. While exploring hill towns in southern France, the nuanced Mediterranean light reminded me of the pink moment back home, before twilight, when the last light of the day is caught between the Topa Topa Mountains and the peaceful Pacific waters. It's a moment when time and distance is held in the subtle beauty of a world as pink as rose. From wherever I'd gone, I would return, more enchanted than when I left. Land has a hold on us. Hometowns are the earth in which we are planted. We take root and grow with the rain and sun given. Some hometowns are a good earth, rich and fertile. Others are a desolate soil where nothing good can grow. We've blood on our land, falls from skateboards and bikes and bloody noses defending childhood honor. Our blood mixes with the dirt and becomes something stronger, glue that binds us to a place on earth. We will defend that place, sometimes to our own deaths. When a foreign dictator threatens our peace, farmers and school teachers become soldiers. When an airplane knocks down our buildings, we declare our land holy and rise to defend it. An attack on our land is an attack on our core. Throughout history, there's nothing fought for so vehemently as land. It's because the dust under our feet defines who we are. Adam was created from dust with breath of God, a product of Eden. We all have complicated relationships with our hometowns. The place we're born says something about our family. If we stay or leave, it says something about us. Every town has a narrative that's difficult to escape. Even Jesus was dismissed because of his hometown. Can anything good come from Nazareth? At some point, we all desire to be a kite, to fly away and soar at heights, allowing us to be all we are fully capable of being, to look down and recognize our towns and ourselves differently, no longer defined by family or neighborhood friends or old girlfriends or boyfriends or those awkward junior high years or by what happened or didn't happen in high school. These are the easy definitions, but they aren't the right ones. We can break free from this, go to college, chase a love, explore the world. We have the choice to soar. When we do, we anchor kite strings to our hometown, not to tether us to our past, but to let us know how far we've flown. I've walked the beach in fleece cold mornings of spring. In a lowering tide, I made first steps in uncertain sand between water and earth. I started at the last jetty and continued south. It's still called New Jetty by those of us who remember the old currents. The dunes shift with history. Girlfriends and fistfights and bonfire days of high school. Dreams and careers and full moon tides that rise all boats. Baptisms, marriages, births, deaths. These are the footprints in the sand. I walk in the comfort of my history with this land. To grow here, to leave and come back is the making of peace. I am a product of Ventura. My history here is woven tightly as a squid boat net, with only good or only bad, cords hang neatly but useless. It's the knots in life that create strength. We all have our peace to make. As much as hometown comforts, it also wounds. It haunts like a first love. The childhood that never felt like a childhood. The loss of someone cutting to the very core of our history, of who we are. the standing alone in desperation of darkness, begging for a light that never came. Our hometowns are the lands of could-haves and should-haves. These are the wounds that run deepest and the reason most people leave. But there's no distance we can travel where a childhood smell carried on a distant breeze won't take us immediately back to our hometowns. We can run from our ghosts, but it's better to let them go. Thank you.
So, I once judged a high school speech contest, and I'm thinking of that right now. Because the first 3 or 4 girls that came up gave these terrific speeches, and they called up the next person, and she stood up and she just walked out the exit because they were so good she didn't want to go next. So since it'd be rude of me to walk away, I'm going to bribe the audience with a bookmark, so just pass these around. Get you on my good side here. So the theme was water, although Ken told me the theme was beer. That's why I came. So first I looked at Wood and Me. I didn't really think there was any water themes in there. So I had one on Yosemite Falls and one on Olympic swimmer John Neighbor. So I decided maybe those weren't the best for the ocean. So my new book out is called Strawberries in Wintertime. That's my plant. and the title comes from, I grew up in Ohio and I first came to Ventura, first time I ever saw the ocean, came to California when I was 12 years old for a vacation. And I had never had strawberries in the wintertime growing up in Ohio. I'm sure you could get them, but they were too expensive, so my mom never bought them. And so we had a whole flat from the Satiquoi market, and they were just so good. And so to me, that's strawberries in wintertime. To me, it means anything that's really unexpected, a pleasure. And I've never been to this museum, so walking in today, this is a Strawberry in Wintertime museum. And this is fabulous. So at first I didn't think I had any water themes really in this book, and then I remembered I took a vacation on the eastern seaboard last year, so I actually had 4 in a row. I'm not going to read all 4, but I had Walton Pond, and then there was a smiling pool of Thornton Burgess is where he grew up, an author, and then the 911 Memorial, the museum, the Pools of Memory. But I'm going to read, it's called America's Rock of Ages. So printed in red letters on a white background, the poster-sized wooden sign reads, "Welcome to the 17th century." Meanwhile, 20 yards away from where I stood at Plymouth Plantation, and it's Plimouth, Plymouth purposely spelled phonetically the way Governor William Bradford did in the 1600s, stood a red vending machine with the familiar white script, Coca-Cola. It was a microcosm of my visit to Plymouth, Massachusetts. While trying to step back nearly 400 years in American history, one foot always seemed to remain firmly planted in the 21st century. For instance, the Mayflower II, a replica of the famous ship the Pilgrims sailed to on America in 1620, is docked beside motorboats with sleek modern sailboats cruising in the backdrop. Still, if you narrow your aperture on the full-scale reproduction, about 100 feet long and 25 feet wide, you realize the Mayflower was extremely small. To carry 102 passengers in the cargo hold, plus 30 crewmen on deck. Indeed, what a cramped, claustrophobic, courageous journey their 66 days at sea must have been. With a dose of imagination, the Mayflower comes into focus like a wooden Apollo 11 with 2 tall masts. Stepping onto the Plymouth Rock, as legend claims the Pilgrim Party did, was arguably a bigger leap for mankind than Neil Armstrong's first lunar footprint 349 years later. After all, those 102 pilgrims have an estimated 32 million descendants today, while the population on the moon remains 0. Now consider just one passenger, John Howland. It is remarkable the ripples a single settler had on American history. In fact, world events actually hung on the single strand of rope Howland miraculously managed to grab hold of after falling overboard during a storm midway through the voyage. Because Howland was rescued from the frigid Atlantic waters, he completed the journey. He was one of 51 pilgrims to survive the first winter of illness and hunger, and ultimately had more descendants than any of his fellow passengers. Moreover, his descendants include U.S. Presidents Franklin Delano Roosevelt, both George Bushes, also literature's Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, and Ralph Waldo Emerson. None of these important figures would have been born had Howland perished before grabbing that fateful tow line. Leo Martin, a renowned historian, was our guide for a foot tour of all things pilgrim. He dressed the part, wearing a brown felt hat and matching shirt with laces at the neck, tan knickers, red stockings, and, Coca-Cola-like juxtaposition here, modern walking shoes. The 2-hour field trip is far more fascinating than the classroom lectures of my youth. One nugget. Leo noted that Bradford brought 400 books on the Mayflower, more volumes than Harvard College had when it was founded in 1636. While the Pilgrim Colony Library was large, Plymouth Rock is not. Indeed, it underwhelms many largely because it is so small. Originally 15 feet long, 3 feet wide, and weighing 10 tons, what remains visible on shore today is only about the size of a queen mattress. No matter, the Great Rock, as it is called, still gave me goosebumps. Plymouth Rock rests inside a steel cage, like a zoo animal almost, to protect it from thieves that would chip off souvenir chunks. 5 feet above, at street level, the sacred site is surrounded by a beautiful open-air outdoor column structure resembling a Roman temple. A piece of Plymouth Rock is on display a few blocks away in Pilgrim Hall, America's oldest continuously operating museum. Rubbing the stone is said to bring good luck, much like kissing Ireland's Blarney Stone does, the gift of eloquence. I remain hopeful still of receiving both rewards. 2, I have rubbed a tiny slice of the moon rock in the Smithsonian National Air Museum, and honestly, touching America's Rock of Ages was an equal thrill. After all, if the story of Plymouth Rock is true, and not merely legend, then this modest boulder is a symbolic ground zero for the 21st century America. Quote, I believe the Pilgrims did step on Plymouth Rock, Leo told me, and I choose to believe him. As Hemingway wrote in The Sun Also Rises, isn't it pretty to think so? A lot of you probably have heard of Louis Zamperini from the movie that came out, the best-selling book a few years ago. So I'm going to read a story. I had lunch with him quite a while ago, though, and this is a story that came from that. Generally, I cannot recall what I had for lunch the previous day. Certainly, if you ask me about 3 days past, I will draw a blank. But I can tell you that the daily special in a Hollywood cafe on a sunny July afternoon 15 years ago was meatloaf. I remember this not because I ordered it, but because my lunch companion did. Only to have the waitress return from the kitchen with news that they were out of gravy. She asked Louis Zamperini what he would like to order instead. My dessert that day was spending the rest of the afternoon with the legendary 1936 Olympic runner and World War II hero, listening to his life story while looking through couch cushion-sized scrapbooks. Zamperini's death arrived on July 2nd, 2014, after he battled pneumonia for 40 days. That may well be a world record for a 97-year-old to hold off pneumonia. but Louis has always had the medal for long, tough battles. After his B-24 Liberator was shot down on May 27, 1943, Air Force Captain Louis Zamperini and one crew member, a third crewmate, died early on. Those two drifted nearly 2,000 miles in the South Pacific, surviving for 47 days while fighting hunger, fighting thirst, and fighting sharks. Quote, "Two big sharks tried to jump in the raft and take us out," Zamperini, then 83 and so fit he still regularly hiked, skied, and skateboarded, told me. After a sip of iced tea, he added, "We went 7 days without water. That was brutal. Nourished only by rainwater, a few fish and seabirds, and 2 small sharks, the 5'9" Zamperini weighed a deathly 67 pounds, 80 pounds below his racing weight when the Japanese patrol boat picked him up. Then the brutality turned truly hellish. For good reason, Louis titled his autobiography, Devil at My Heels. And for good reason, Laura Hillebrand's best-selling biography of Zamperini is titled Unbroken. Even 2.5 years in a POW slave camp could not break him. Certainly Japanese Army Sergeant Matsuro Wanabe tried to break Zamperini. The bird, as the prisoners called this devil incarnate, beat him daily, beat him bloody, and during one savage streak, used a belt buckle to beat Louis into unconsciousness 14 days in a row. For these reasons, I called Zamperini the toughest miler ever in my column after interviewing him. Here's how great a miler Zamperini was. His national prep record set at Torrance High stood for a full 20 years. He was back-to-back NC2A champion at USC, and in his 1939 national collegiate record of 4 minutes and 8 seconds stood for 15 years. Zamperini's greatest running victory, however, came off the cinder track. Quote, "Absolutely, my athletic background saved my life," he told me. "I kept thinking about my athletic training when I was competing against the elements, against the enemy, against hunger, and against thirst. In athletics, you learn to find a way to increase your effort. In athletics, you don't quit, ever." Zamperini shared other life lessons with me, like, faith is more important than courage, and this, I forgave the bird. Only by doing so, he explained, did he finally escape his own post-war emotional prison. And now there's a lesson in his death, too, that a single flower for the living is better than a bouquet on the grave. While it is wonderful that Unbroken became a bestseller, it is sad that the movie of Zamperini's heroic life finally reached silver screen 5 months after his death. How much sweeter had the film been made in the 1950s, with Tony Curtis starring as he wanted to star, or in the late 1990s, Nicolas Cage was interested, when Zamperini could have enjoyed it. Similarly, how sorrowful that the Tournament of Roses waited until 2015 to honor Zamperini as its Grand Marshal. Did parade organizers think he would live forever? Why wait until he was 97? Was he any less worthy of the honor at 87 or 67? Back to that lunch. I finally remember Louis' answer when the waitress told him there was no gravy. No matter, not after what he had endured. The toughest miler ever smiled and ordered the meatloaf anyway.
Is now the time for the Q&A?
That's right.
Ken will take all your questions.
Can't hear me.
You ride a bull taco.
What's that?
You ride a bull taco motorcycle?
No, this is a taco shop, a place we camped out this summer.
Okay. Bull taco.
I may have set a
I
record
thought
of
they
most
stopped
tacos
making
eaten.
them
Yeah.
fast.
Sorry, I'm off to a disappointing start. Other questions?
For Ken, tell us about Machu Picchu.
Machu Picchu, have you been there?
No, my sister here is on a trip
Oh,
in May to go
okay.
there. And she's been working out regularly.
Oh, okay.
So I want
Yeah, well, that's not a bad thing. when I went there, I actually I did it for a magazine article for American Airlines, and we did it in probably the most idiotic fashion possible. We were 2 weeks outside of Machu Picchu, and we ran in. So, I mean, running being a relative term, I actually trained really hard for it, but there's a lot of steeps up and downs, as you know. So a lot of times, and plus I use the excuse like, well, I want to see the scenery. And my friends were running, washing their feet because the ground's really uneven, and I was absorbing the scene because I was a writer on assignment. And also when I got to camp, everything was ready. So, but it's a beautiful, beautiful place, and honestly, it's no lie. I've had a chance to travel some really nice places as a travel writer, but I'll never forget the goosebumps I got when I came up through the sun gate. They timed it so we came up as dawn. The sun was rising, and it's magic. I mean, a lot of places these days have been discovered, you know, and rediscovered and rediscovered. Now there's buses and all that sort of thing, but they still can't steal the magic of a remarkable place. So, and when do you go?
May.
May, okay. And how long will you be there?
Well, probably 9 days. I'm going to attempt to climb Mount Whitney first.
Oh, wow. That's great, because I actually have a real fear of heights, so I really admire that kind of thing. Well, good, then Machu Picchu will be a cakewalk. Yeah, you'll have to run up and down several times during the course of the day, I think. But good for you. I mean, I honestly believe, and we all know this, that life's short, and you want to make the most of the time you have here in any fashion that you can, because putting things off can be sadly pointless. So have a great time. Thanks.
Thank you. All right.
Guess I'll be there. See.
How about Woody? What's your favorite story of all the years?
Wow. Can you do a mic drop?
Oh, that's impossible. When I was writing 3 columns a week, people would ask me, like, what was your column about yesterday? I couldn't remember because I was focused on the one tomorrow. So, Louisiana Perini was a pretty special one. Gosh, there's so many. Every one, both those books, so you should just get both books and you'll see my favorite ones.
Any other questions? What a loss. Yes.
I know that the son of John Steinbeck died just recently, and he lived in Oxnard for a while. Did any of you know him?
No, I don't think we did.
He was a writer.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah, he was wonderful. That's tough footsteps to follow in.
Right.
Yeah, but a lot of writers just, I don't know about Roger and Woody, but their lives
Are probably somewhat similar to mine, but it's a weird combination of like sitting in a dark room all alone like some freak, and then going out into the world and having this raucous experience. So it is kind of funny. I mean, the fact that he lived in Oxnard, what time frame was that?
Well, we went to his book signing event, but I know he died just last week, but he said it took courage to write since he was the son of such a great writer. But he also wrote about California.
Okay, yeah. Well, actually, that's nice that you point that out, because one of the other writers that was going to come, his name is Jeff McElroy, and he's an absolutely beautiful writer, and he writes largely about California, and in my opinion, he's very much like Steinbeck, same beautiful turns of phrase, same pithy descriptions that stick with you. I'm sorry Jeff wasn't here, but if you ever get the chance, it's McElroy, spelled like it sounds, M-C-E-L-R-O-Y, and his books are beautiful. 2 books of short stories that I'm aware of. I've read both of them, and they're fantastic. But this area, we all know, is filled with talent on every front. I mean, painters, writers, poets, musicians. It's really, I think, a golden place to live. You know, a lot of us are attracted to the beauty here. But I think, and I don't include myself in those talented people, but it's a great artisans community. And I think we're all lucky to live here, but I didn't realize that. Thank you.
Yeah, question for Roger. I really enjoyed your write. It's very poignant and very moving. And this was the piece, this was your home county but I think you said it's part of a kind of a travel logbook. So I'm curious what other places you wrote about and what that experience was. Was it one journey or collection over time?
It's, thank you, I'm glad you like the writing. That's actually, this is one of 32 chapters, assuming the publisher accepts all of them. But they're all, I was fascinated by this idea of going, because probably like all of us, we seek all these experiences, and as a result, I've had a chance to travel, lots of places. But it seems like places I'd spent a lot of time, whether it was, not like Glacier National Park or whatever, they have this lasting impact on us. So I wanted to explore this idea of how was I shaped as a person, as a father, as a husband, as a friend, by these natural places. What is it about those places that draw us to it, and what do they kind of communicate to us through being there? So the Venturas was kind of a homage to the hometown. I kind of wanted it in there. But yeah, there's a bunch of, it's 32 places throughout the West. Some you've heard of, some will be really, really random. But something special about all of them. Yeah, it's called, the title is We Stood Upon Stars. It doesn't come out till Father's Day in the spring, so we got a little ways for it to go. Thanks. Yes.
Thank you guys for your excellent writing. Woody, Jim Murray always says he wanted to bring out the heroes in sports. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I was lucky enough to, I actually wanted to become a sports writer because of Jim Murray. I read him when we moved here when I was 13. And I'd read him in LA Times. I like the first time I ever read the newspaper just because of Jim Murray. And so when I graduated from UC Santa Barbara, before graduation, I wrote him a letter just asking for advice on pursuing my career. And he was nice enough to write back, and we kind of became pen pals. And then when I finally started going to the press box in LA, I finally met him. And we became friends. He was just amazing, amazing man. So humble. You would never know. He didn't think he was as great as he was, obviously. He was just so humble. He took people on his wings. But like him, I like to not write stats and just about sports. Like when I had my sports column, now I write a non-sports column in the Star. When I did a sports column, I really didn't write about sports so much as I just wrote about people. And one of the best compliments I'd have, I would just have so many, not to be sexist, but women don't always read the sports page. I'd have so many women who just go, I don't read the sports page, but I do read you because you don't write about sports. And so I think I got that from Jim Murray. If you just tell a good story, it doesn't matter what your subject matter is. And he always thought sports was a great avenue to tell a good story, just because sports is like life. It's just got this story arch to it, whether it's one game or someone's career. It's just a good way. You have great stories to tell. And so, yeah, Murray was great. Thanks.
It's also worth mentioning that Woody, what's the award you won? Might be called the Jim Murray Award. I forget what it's for, but so anyhow, it's kind of neat. Speaking of arches, just thought you should know that.
I'm curious, when did you start planning to be a writer? Did you study, or did it kind of evolve?
Well, it pretty much evolved. So my grandfather was a small-town doctor, and my dad's a surgeon, and both my older brothers are surgeons. And all I knew was I didn't want to be a doctor. And both my brothers, they went to UC Santa Barbara, and so I would visit them. And I had no idea what I wanted to study, but I just fell in love with the campus, so all I knew was that that's where I wanted to go to school. I didn't know what I wanted to study. And I went there actually just, another thing was to play on the tennis team, because I was a pretty good youth tennis player. And my second year there, I really hurt my back badly, so I couldn't play tennis anymore. And so I kind of had some free time or whatever, and I just saw an ad in the Daily Nexus newspaper. They needed a sports writer. And so I just on a lark tried it, and it stuck. And UCSB, they didn't have a journalism program, and I didn't want to transfer, so I just really started loading up on English classes. And the best class I had my whole time at Santa Barbara, just one of the best teachers I ever had, was for the poetry of Robert Frost. And I actually have a story about him mentioning that teacher in Strawberries, because he just really imparted the love of language and rhythm from poetry, but you really have it, I think, in good writing. And like a poem, a really good poem, I've heard of some great poets that they'll spend 4 hours, 6 hours adding in 3 words, and then they'll spend the next 8 hours taking out 6 words. But shorter is usually better, and that's what I found with columns too. Just shorter is better. The more time you spend to take out every extra word is really worth it. So yeah, so that's kind of how that happened.
I'm curious. Yeah.
I want to hear how Roger became a writer. I know how I became a writer.
Yeah, actually, this book, My Best Friend's Funeral, was the first thing I'd ever written. So I hadn't studied writing. I wasn't really all that smart. I was in business, and my business failed, so I was unemployed, depressed, and I started drinking a lot. So I was like, man, I'm a perfect writer. So my wife kind of suggested, why don't you start writing? And some other friends did too, so I was like, all right, I'll give it a shot. And so I just started writing, and then this book kind of happened out of that. I had no intention for it to be anything. It was somewhat just My Best Friend's Funeral is a memoir about growing up with my best friend, and obviously he passed, and so I just wanted to capture these stories of he and I growing up together. And then kind of one thing led to another, and it got published, which was kind of a big validation. But I kind of came to it. I was about 38 or 40, I think. I think the book came out when I was about 40. Maybe a little after that. So I hadn't ever written until then. So that's how I did it. Yeah. So yeah, just drink a lot and be depressed.
Hemingway used to say, he said, write drunk and edit sober, so I think...
I'm a happy drunk. So writers are generally unemployable. So I came to write. It's actually really kind of fun it's the one job. I talk to a lot of high school groups, and especially writers classes and things, and I always tell them the same thing. You can come to writing from any direction. You don't necessarily, it doesn't hurt to be academically trained, but I think there's a lot to be said for seeing the world, and I probably say that because I wasn't academically trained, but it's like a muscle. The more you use it, hopefully the better you get, and you improve with time. I never had a job. I worked as a professional lifeguard. I did all sorts of silly things, but all those times I think I was sort of absorbing things, and then I started writing when I was about 23 or 24 for a local weekly here called The Sandpaper, and then one thing led to another, and I published in various magazines, and for 25 years that's what I've done along with the books. So I guess if there are any writers in this crowd, and there probably are, I wouldn't feel inadequate because I don't have a Master's of Fine Arts from Stanford. Not to say that that's not a good thing, but I think writing we all know writers that we like who came from backgrounds that are wholly unexpected, and maybe in a sense that's a boon. So, if we're any indication, there's room for the unemployable. Yes?
I enjoyed your book, Together We Jump.
Oh, thank you.
And I'm wondering...
Oh, is that the same person? Thank you.
How did this come about? What was your kind of impetus for...
Sure. Together We Jump, it's sort of a love story, and it's about second chances, and the protagonist is about 80 years old, and he takes a cross-country trip, and it's sort of about trying to right mistakes of the past, and you can't get past everything, but you can. Regret is the sharpest thorn, I think, and it's largely, that's sort of the thesis of that book, that, so often we live our lives and we refuse to take a chance or try to right wrong. So that's sort of what the gist of the book was about. Oddly enough, I suffer no angst whatsoever. I'm married to a beautiful woman. I have a happy life. I've really been blessed. But that book was largely based, the center character, Pogue Whithouse, who and I know the other writers here, you start writing fiction and you start to fall in love with the characters. But he was largely based on an uncle that I had. And keeping it short, the uncle was a war hero, never talked about it. When his wife died, he started taking cross-country trips at 80, all by himself. And it took some guts, and he was also really fun and adaptable. Like, he would drive from New York across the country, and he would finish his trip by visiting us, and then he would drive up towards Big Sur, and like the day after our visit, I'd get a picture of him with 2 hot-looking girls, because he'd figured out the technology where he knew how to use his camera and then print it from his car and then send us the postcard. So I really admire that kind of stuff. And you know, he could have just stayed at home for the rest of his life. He had the love of his life, and they had a long life together, and she passed away as life goes, and he could have just buried himself early. And instead he hitched up his trousers and set off. So that's, he's posed loosely based on Jim Ladd. So thanks for reading. I mean, we all appreciate, writing is really funny. We all have to survive and eat, and that's not easy. But, and harder these days. I mean, in the time that we've had this talk, 10,000 books have come out. And 500 of them are really good. And I don't mean that I mean, it's competitive, it's hard, it's this torrent, and you know, you have to try to get noticed. I mean, it's really, really difficult. But I don't care if people read my books, or Roger's books, or Woody's books. I just like it that people read books. So, thank you. Yeah. And it was nice of you to read together again.
Oh, my glasses.
I would have straightened them out. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Are you aware that the 2 of the passengers on the Mayflower were indentured servants?
That's Woody's question, was were you aware that 2 of the passengers on the Mayflower were indentured servants?
Yes.
There's a safe answer.
Our tour guide is really, he's written books on it, so he pretty much gave us a PhD lecture on it. So yeah, he gave a good lecture.
It's interesting. Are you a student of the Mayflower? Or?
Yes.
Yeah. This is a tough crowd. I came here once before. I mean, and spoke about maritime history on Cape Cod, and boy, I was terrified. So.
One of my great relatives was named Edward Gotti. He was one of the indentured servants.
Oh, really? He was a relative?
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
Oh.
He had to do 7 years.
Okay. I'm glad he survived the trip and the rest. Yeah.
He begot.
Yeah. Well, they had to make up for time quickly back then. Their lifespans were shorter. Yeah.
Books written about him.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, if there aren't any other questions, you're free to go. Thank you so much. Yeah.